Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well. This Thursday, 30 November 2023. We meet today to talk crypto, to talk BTC, to talk news. Because yes, we once again have a lot of news to see together, and it starts right away. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training course worth €400, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto, investment, technical analysis, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress, and all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. FTX had the validation to sell $873 million of assets, a large part of which are GBTC, or in any case linked to Grayscale Capital. And therefore we had the authorization, and in terms of the distribution of assets, we have almost 600 million, which are classic GBTC, so that is to say the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust of Grayscale, which is precisely what we talked about in the various daily newspapers and in the Sunday videos where I explained to you the role that had played aptly Grayscale in the previous bull run and the role that they could precisely not play in the next one, and the importance that it had. So for me, it is indeed a sign that we are starting to free up funds for FTX to repay creditors. So that's very positive, but it also means that we will have other sales to anticipate later and that we will follow in all cases. The other good news is that there will be yet another new player entering ETFs. But above all, the discussion that took place at the level of BlackRock and the SEC, a discussion that took place on November 28, so a few days ago, so we always learn this a little late. But in which above all they are redoing their model of redemption and their model of monetary transfer, we come back to that a little bit. What is interesting is that this type of discussion, because that was the model before, the model after, is the addition of monetary flows between the market maker who is offshore and the market maker who is recorded in the USA. But what is interesting is that when we have a reflection which is still on these modelings, it implies that the ETF is not yet ready to actually release. So we still have a little time in the decision and the implementation, and that certainly confirms the QOWN 2024 validation for us. Not to mention perhaps a little more if we ever have a refusal and then resubmit. This could happen if the deadlines are too short and we need to make changes. In any case, it's accelerating, and it's rather positive for ETFs. Then, more good news for Wormhole. Wormhole, which was one of the biggest hacks we had. Wormhole, which is a platform specialized in the interconnection between blockchains, so it is a bridge, and it raised funds of $225 million to raise its valuation to $25 billion, and the goal is to continue to develop their interconnection solution and to be able to continue to provide security. So if I'm not talking nonsense, Wormhole was a $600 million hack, which was just impressive and which also shows the complexity that can be had in maintaining and setting up bridge. And also Wormhole can being a very good example of a company that manages to recover from a hack. But Wormhole, once again, was a very, very big company with big resources. And despite that, they still had a lot of trouble. So something else, and here we're going to change the tone a little bit, just before we're going to check the releases. Because we still have a lot of things dropping. We have DIDX, which is going to drop in 18 hours to $475 million, which are released. It's huge, okay? It's really huge. So we're going to have to be careful about that on this typology. So we can still have a big short, and we still have some big ones liberations that we are going to have, with in particular the one NCH, we ECH. We'll have LQTY, which will also arrive in the coming days. I invite you to constantly monitor this token, Unlocked App Site, which simply allows you to check when there is a release, and you will see that in fact sometimes there are certain blocks of release which is interesting and important to know in advance. So that being said, we are going to talk about this news which broke, and in particular which came through Reuters. And this greatly echoes what we experienced at the level of Binance, in which there were accusations of financing terrorism through Binance. And now what is it? It's Tron. And I told you that after attacking CZ, it was definitely going to be Justinson who was going to be the case. And when I made the video for you on Tron, I invite you to watch it. I told you that Tron was very opaque, and that especially behind it, it was mainly used by one person. That's to Justinson in the transfers of funds between these different companies. So for me, we are still in something which is very particular. And the fact of having this typology of communication will reinforce different actions which will certainly take place against Tron and against Justinson. And very clearly, I think that we will have a strengthening of the regulations, and it shows because it's the same. We are in the process of appealing, saying that we need more tools to be able to regulate cryptos, to be able to work on this part, to also be able to regulate new laws and be very, very rigorous when it comes to the sanctions that will be taken and compliance with the sanctions that have been taken by the USA versus other countries. So we have clearly seen North Korea. We are also talking about Russia. So obviously I think that we are going to have pressure from the US, which will be more increased once again. This is precisely what I explained to you in the videos from this weekend. Where indeed for me, Binance is not necessarily a good sign for the long term for cryptos. On the other hand, we have a very good short-term sign with, in particular, the figures which fell from the quarterly GDP T3 US 49 in forecast, 5.2. We will certainly analyze them quietly on Saturday, but here in this case we really have a big sign that we had a very big quarter for the USA, and I think that the T4 will also be very positive, and therefore that confirms to us that we are in the process of finishing and GAT, a very good year. For the USA, which also explains the acceleration that we had here, the wick, that we had a very big wick at the level of the S&P 500, but which was entirely swallowed up, because it is a quarter in which we suspected already basic that it was going to be very good given the results of the different companies, given the accelerations that we were able to experience at the equity level. And this is not because we had a very good quarter that behind us we still have an inflation problem, even if it is being regulated. We still have a problem linked to the Fed's key rate, in which unfortunately the fact of having good news is more inclined to say that we have resilience in the American market, and therefore the market is saying, ooh, maybe at the end of the year I'll have another rate increase. Or in any case, perhaps the pivot will not happen as quickly as hoped, and therefore this precisely explains why the wick was bought back. So we are still relatively far away because we still have an inversion in terms of yielding. Therefore, in the remuneration of American Treasury bonds between the 10 years and the 2 years. So that means that we are still in a period of instability. And so we have to watch that. It's very good news. But also the market is becoming worried about this flow of good news. On the other hand, we continue in the macro. We can clearly see that we have a very good reaction as expected in the zone in terms of the dollar index, which is at the same time consistent when we looked at the euro, SD, so we are rather in a process where we are going to have breathing or consolidation in this area. Ideally a little breath to either retest the 103 here or look, why not a little higher with here a potential retest of the 104.3, so we still have a form of consolidation at the dollar level, so that we also expect that if we have a dollar that grows, we risk having pressure that will be exerted on the BTC, given that in addition at the level of the BTC we are in an important zone, we see that we are having difficulty passing through. Clearly see the closure we are making. To do weekly, which is totally crushed, which is a bit the same image that we experienced a few weeks before, although we continued to push upwards, nevertheless we see that we have a lack of aggressiveness at the level of the market, because we do not forget that the burst that we had here is a burst that is linked to the BlackRock rumor. We can clearly see that this transition to acceleration, and notably this candle, which was the false rumor, and there in this case we had all the news on the potential validation of BlackRock, and therefore the market acceleration that took place linked to that. So it's normal that during this period here we have a stabilization of the market because we had the preparation of the rumor. Now we are waiting for validation, and that is a little bit of what is being prepared with the different interventions between the SEC and BlackRock. So we can clearly see that it's being validated. It's not yet right away, but in any case, there are only certainties about the validation of ETFs. That's just the date which is under consideration. However, it should be noted that since we broke the 32,000 and went to type the 38,000, we see that we have really moved to the level of the overbought RSI. And what's interesting to see is that we actually notice the overboughts very late. When we look, we type them, for example, on the last cycle. We hit them at the level of August 2020. And again, we just touch the line. We are not consolidated above. The consolidation took place when we had the rupture here of these zones, to therefore something which has not yet happened. When we look, we are still very, very far away. We should ideally be able to break that by 48,000 to say that we are in the same schematic. So we are in something which is still relatively different. And when we look at the passages in overbought, on the other hand, we had some during the cycle in which, in fact, we had before the halving, a passage into overbought before having precisely the COVID crash and a breather. So we will always be careful because it is true that the real systematically overbought passages that we may have had were subsequently reworked to then have the acceleration and the fact of remaining overbought throughout the bull run, which always happens after the halving. Is this cycle going to be identical or not? This comment has been made to me several times, and I find it to be very true. It's because we always try to see the difference even though we always do the same thing. So it's very interesting, and are we going to be once again in a cycle where we think that it will be different and that we will simply retest these areas in which I will certainly present to you my vision once again, and I will explain to you why there are areas which are very interesting which we will have to monitor on Saturday. But in any case, we are here in a process where we think that it is different. Will it be different or not? Will the validation of ETFs really change things? In the short term, we know that it has changed in the long term, but has it changed things in the short term? That's going to be the answer we'll get very, very quickly anyway, at least Q1 2024, as I told you. So short term on BTC, we are still in this range, which is always very present for me, in which we are working on the top of the range. When we zoom in a little, we see that we still have something that is relatively clean on the establishment of a range, of a lateralization, and which still greatly resembles a wick-off distribution. BC, Arkansas, ST, Esau, Utah, okay, with potentially a small UTAD, which was made there, just a small bit. But overall, we are still on a nice distribution, which is itself the UTAD of what's happening. Okay, so we're still in something, and GT. Something which is very specific when you are used to this type of distribution, which can very quickly transform into reaccumulation. All we have to do is go and rework the 35-36 zone here with a nice build-up, and then we'll get going again very, very quickly. Nevertheless, in the short term, what is interesting to see is that we systematically push, we seek equity, we systematically leave the lows. We are still in a bullish flow, and that does not change until we reverse. The inversion, for example, would go on the break now of 36,726. On break of 36,726, we can say to ourselves that we are in a form of inversion, and therefore at this moment we would look for the following levels, which would be 35,600. And I even think that we would look quite low. We would look for this part of liquidity. But we are once again very far from it because we still haven't broken any lows. Yes, currently we still have a pattern in which we say to ourselves that we have made a small break of structure. We are in the process of doing a classic retest. We have filled the imbalance that is found here to get the order block which is there. And then we are in the process of pushing downwards. But nevertheless, here we could simply stop here on the level of 37,860 before potentially starting again, okay? We are always very careful here. Personally, I came back on this retest here, and I'm already in BE to make a continuation either bearish or simply take part of the profits on rupture here of 37,589, and ideally I will aim for the target which is at 37,279 over the longer term and see the reaction of the price in this area, whether yes or no we perforate, whether we do a reaccumulation and we're starting to rise again. It's going to be a little bit as expected, and it's going to need to monitor. Speaking of monitoring, don't forget that we are going to do the monthly closing, which will be very important. We will talk about it tomorrow anyway. We started talking about it in Monday's daily, so we are in a monthly closing, so obviously we are going to have the volatility linked to that, which is rather positive for our trading. Then we have Ethereum BTC, which actually shows the overperformance or underperformance of Ethereum relative to BTC. We see that we are not really in a reacceleration phase. We do not have a burst of Ethereum, unfortunately. We are rather in a consolidation phase here. To be able to really validate a break, we will have to go beyond 0.64, 0.65 here to say that in fact we would have returned to an acceleration phase. This is not the case. We is just working the support rather classically. In terms of order flow, what is interesting to see is that we are still in the same dynamic. Certainly we have a small increase in open interest here, but we see that on the open aggregate interest, therefore, which brings together and GT, all the rest of the open interest, we see that we are on something which is rather stable, and with a trend always identical, and therefore always this reversal of trend here, and the same for the positions of the top traders. Nothing changes. We have a market which is still not very aggressive, so nothing changes too. We have very little liquidity at the top, a lot of liquidity at the bottom, at least on Kingfisher, therefore on high leverage liquidity. And when we look at the heat map, we seize that the socket of liquidity was immediately defended, and strongly defended now, precisely by the shorts. And that is also why we did not manage to pass, because it was strongly sold and defended, and that's why we are also strongly asking the question of not having a bullish reacceleration to really liquidate this part and let go of the shorts before having a breath which will be much greater and go and seek. Why not? The liquidity which is there. I tend to tell you that I would rather aim for first time, second time, third time. Go get the liquidity that is here, and then go hit the shorts again for a final acceleration, or a penultimate acceleration, which could be done in several stages. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It always makes me very happy. And above all, it supports the channel and it supports everything I do every day. And we meet at 13:30 to talk about Chainlink's crypto.